Good afternoon, everyone. This event is the second of our free member webinars to mark this year's South Asian History Month celebrations. The webinar entitled Systemic Racism and How to Tackle It will be addressed by a range of our leading members of South Asian heritage. When we pull the plans together for South Asian History Month, which is now in the second successive year, we consult with an informal group of leading psychiatrists of South Asian heritage. And both this year and last year, the members of this group said it was vital that we cover the issue of race and racism. They say that the careers of many doctors of South Asian heritage are routinely blighted by racism. This perspective is backed up by the data collected by the NHS itself. This shows that doctors from ethnic minorities face discrimination on a range of levels, with their being more likely to report personal experiences of discrimination, more likely to accept what is offered, for instance, risky placements, unsafe rotas, lack of remote working equipment or opportunities, more likely to suffer from bias and stereotyping, more likely to experience formal disciplinary processes, more likely to fear being reported or warned for raising concerns, more likely to experience bullying and harassment from staff and patients, more likely to suffer from reduced pay progression and promotion, less likely to receive constructive feedback, more likely to suffer from increased anxiety, stress, isolation, less confidence to ask questions, call out unacceptable behaviours, or express opinions. Less likely to be engaged, having a limited voice in the organisation, reduced input into safe rotas, redeployment, and working from home. It has also been shown that doctors from ethnic minorities are more likely to contract COVID-19 while working on the front line of healthcare delivery. While we can't tackle racism in the NHS directly ourselves, we can call it out and put forward suggested ways of delivering equality. As a college, we were very proud when Dinesh Bogra became our president, making one of the first doctors of Asian heritage to be president of a UK Medical Royal College. With Subodh Dave as our dean, 50% of our officer team is of South Asian heritage. And of course, I am as registrar, although we've had a previous registrar of South Asian heritage too. More than 25% of our council members are of South Asian heritage, and a third of our total membership is of South Asian heritage. We are a college that has hugely benefited from the input of a substantial cohort of South Asian heritage doctors and psychiatrists, as well as staff of South Asian heritage. Racism pervades all aspects of our society. Every person and every institution is touched by it, including those which we hold most dear. Yes, even our beloved NHS is not immune. Racism is its most pervasive and shameful secret. People from a Black, Asian, or minority ethnic background face a triple whammy of blows to their mental health due to the suffering disproportionately from COVID-19, the despair and hurt many people feel following the killing of George Floyd, and the ongoing institutional racism in the NHS. We know there is deeply embedded prejudice and discrimination in modern society. In our college Equality Action Plan we published in January, we have 29 actions that we are currently working on to fight racial inequalities and other forms of discrimination. We will continue to keep promoting equality in our organisation for staff, but also our members and patients and carers. So racial discrimination in the NHS and other employer organisations is our business. As part of our fight to tackle ethnic inequalities, our President Adrian James has recently joined the board of the NHS Race and Health Observatory, which works to improve health outcomes for NHS patients, communities and staff. We also work to remind the mental health services that it is vital that they ensure equality for doctors of South Asian heritage and other ethnic minority backgrounds. We strive to be an organisation that celebrates diversity and delivers equality, ensures fairness, and allows everyone to give their best, and we hope all of our staff and our members will continue to deliver this. Racism affects us all because it dehumanises us, and that is why we have put together this list of resources. Through education, examination, and active listening, we can challenge ourselves to do better. Being part of a society requires work from everyone. We can all do better. by challenging the negative opinions and stereotypes we have and help dismantle structural racism and racial inequalities. So I'm now going to move to our absolutely fantastic array of speakers we have this afternoon for you. We will have them presenting for roughly 10 minutes each or thereabouts, and then we're going to have a series of questions, hopefully. And please do, we have a few questions already, but please do think of the questions you'd like to ask our eminent speakers today. So first of all, we have a talk entitled Celebrate, but also Support Equality and Parity for South Asian Doctors. So we have the amazing Dr. Raj Mohan, who is a colleague of mine at South London and Maudsley. He is a consultant rehab psychiatrist at SLAM. He did his medical education training in India and trained as a psychiatrist in large teaching hospitals. He came to the UK as an international medical graduate and continued his training, and then moved into a research fellowship for a short while before taking on his role as consultant psychiatrist. He teaches medical students at King's Medical School and also actively promotes quality improvement in mental health, which involves patients and carers. Raj is the immediate past president of the RC Psych Rehab and Social Psychiatry faculty. He's one of the 2 presidential leads for race and equality at the college with Laddie Smith, who many of you may know and will know, I hope. He will be talking today about approaches to tackle inequality in mental health. He is absolutely passionate about equality and equity, integrated care, and about enabling patients to lead on their care and decisions. He's also extremely active on Twitter. Over to you, Dr. Mohan. Over to you, Raj. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Trudy. Can I just say what an absolute pleasure this is to be at this event, the second of the South Asian History Month celebrations in the months of July and August for 2021. It's been a strange time for all of us as doctors and practitioners, working remotely, dealing with unexpected crises, changes in our services, changes in focus, also keeping everyone safe, including ourselves. And the pandemic has just thrown so many curveballs in our professional lives and the risks we all run. The notoriously high rates of COVID infections, COVID complications, and COVID mortality in doctors of BAME origin, especially South Asian doctors, were dying in such large numbers. So it's been such a difficult time. And there is no other time to celebrate and appreciate the contributions that we make to the NHS, because without the presence of the South Asian contingent of doctors and trainees, NHS wouldn't be functioning at all. So I've just been fortunate enough to have a look at the latest, when I say latest, it's the first ever medical workforce race equality standard report, which was just published a couple of days ago by NHS England. And this data collection started sometime in September last year. There's an article in the BMJ, and I'm sure you would have picked up some of these things in the leading newspapers as well. I'm going to ask for Emma's help or Charlotte's help to put the link onto the chat so that you can take some time to read this. Also, I'm interested in your questions and your comments and thoughts about how do we tackle the systemic racism that exists in psychiatry and medicine in general. So the headline news, which is not making headlines, is the fact that the proportion of BAME doctors in the NHS in mental health is now 42%. It's actually higher than it's ever been. So 42% of all NHS doctors, including doctors in training and non-training posts, are from ethnic minority origins. So this is something we need to celebrate. However, the rest of the report makes for some very sobering reading, and I will come to that in a short while. I wanted to say that my journey into medicine started in India, in a southern state of Kerala, and I wasn't necessarily sure if I would make it to medical school because we weren't really well off, and we somehow managed to, I somehow managed to get into medical school. I didn't have any aspirations or hopes of leaving the country, but my career took off. I was able to join and do psychiatry. I did a couple of degrees and diplomas in psychiatry before I had the opportunity to come to the UK on a Royal College fellowship. It was called the double sponsorship at the time. I think many doctors from India and South Asian countries would have benefited from this scheme at the time. But it was done at a time when UK faced huge shortages of doctors and they actually needed trained psychiatrists. Ironically, I had 5.5 years of experience in psychiatry and I was 1 year away from getting a proper consultant job in India. But I had the opportunity to come here and start as a first-year trainee. So I was quite experienced and well trained, but underpaid at that stage because that was how the system was, that I would only be employed as a year 1 trainee. And then I went through the exam system. I did my part 1 and part 2 membership exams and did my SPR training. So by the end of my SPR training, I had already done 11 years of continuous, fairly high quality training. And some of my training was at the Maudsley towards the end, but prior to that, I had done good quality training. But I realized that I was lagging behind other people already in terms of your earning potential or your career progression and so on. But it wasn't bad because you gained a lot of experience across multiple settings. So this is, it's not a typical journey because people take different routes to get to where they are. UK-born people of South Asian heritage have very different trajectories. But one of the things that you see when you look at data is that people from South Asian backgrounds, like all other ethnic minority groups, do not have the same experience or access or outcomes within their careers in psychiatry or in medicine in general. The latest report, which is now on the chat, and I urge you to have a look at it, actually shows these stark disparities. For instance, one of the things is that if you apply for a job and you belong to an ethnic minority group, you are less likely to be shortlisted. And if you do manage to be shortlisted, you would find that your chances of being successful in an interview is less than that of a white person. So within your careers, you also find other kind of negative experiences. These include an increased number of complaints, a disproportionately high number of complaints made against people from ethnic minority backgrounds. And many of these complaints are investigated and referred to the GMC. And for the complaints that GMC receives, it chooses to investigate more complaints that come relating to Black and ethnic minority doctors rather than the white doctors' complaints that they get. So, within our systems, there are systemic problems. When you see such gross differences persisting year after year, this is not attributable to individual properties. It is attributable to a system which disadvantages groups of people. So while the number of ethnic minority doctors in general in the NHS system or the healthcare system has gone up, we have to be mindful that more doctors are actually having a less privileged or less fortunate journey through the system and having more adverse consequences. And you would also have seen that people who refer to GMC have huge degree of psychological consequences, stress-related problems, and high suicide rates. So work that needs to happen has to be centered around collection of really high quality data. This is actually very important, very pertinent, why the medical work race equality standard data, which has just been published, actually it's an opening gambit in a way. But this is not that different from the workforce race equality standard, which has been in operation. I think the data has been collected from 2014 or 15, but it hasn't led to a lot of change. And that makes us realize the fact that collecting data on its own makes really no difference if you have to have the systems and provisions to drive those changes forward. You really have to involve the people, try to understand their experience, see where the problems are happening, what happens in interview panels, for example, what happens when people apply to jobs, who does the selection. All these things need to be carefully considered, and your systems, policies, and procedures have to be so good and so transparent and so overseen in such an effective way so that these differences can start to be addressed over time. But one of the things I would stress is how welcome people feel when they come into teams. When they start working in a healthcare system, there is usually a sense that you're not treated the same as other people, you're not given the same respect, you don't have the same opportunities. And this is another thing that really needs to significantly change. So some of the work that the college will be doing as part of its Equality Action Plan is to work with the trusts to set up systems to reduce the likelihood of differential attainment, which happens throughout the careers. It starts in medical school, it goes through your training days, it goes through your employment, it goes through your careers. And finally, when you retire, your final pension is significantly lower because your earnings are less. The ethnicity pay gap is estimated to be around 6 to 7% according to the latest data. So these things are really, really significant. I'm actually mindful of the time, and I'm interested in hearing from you during the Q&A session. But can I just say thank you so much for having me as part of this panel, and wishing you all a fantastic South Asian History Month in 2021. Thank you. Back to you, Trudi.
Raj, that was absolutely fantastic, and thank you so much for those insights. That was brilliant. I can see that some questions being posted. Could we ask that the questions are posted in the Q&A, please, and then I can pick them up at the end of the session. That's brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone. And then moving on from Raj to our next speaker, who is Dr. Sri Kalidindi. I'm an extremely lucky person because I also get to work with Sri locally at South London and Maudsley. Sri's talk is called Be the Change You Want to See in the World. Can't wait to hear what this is about. Sri is an extremely experienced adult psychiatrist, both in her clinical area, innovating clinical service development and contracting, research, teaching, training, conference organization, publishing, policy, campaigning, strategy, and system leadership. I'm very humbled to be in this presence, I have to say. Sri is an experienced clinician in both inpatient and community rehabilitation psychiatry. She has expertise in service development, performance, and contracting, including being the clinical lead in the development of the Lambeth Rehab Alliance, the largest mental health alliance in the country at that time. Her PhD from the IOPPN was based on endophenotypes of bipolar disorder using neuroimaging of bipolar twins. She has most recently been the co-principal investigator on the National 10-Centre Stepwise RCT. Her textbook that she co-edited and co-authored, Enabling Recovery, the Principles and Practices of Rehabilitation Psychiatry, was highly commended in the BMA Book Awards 2016, and she has many peer-reviewed journal publications. She has also published articles in the national press and appeared on television and radio as a spokesperson for our college. Senior leadership roles have included Associate Medical Director at SLAM Foundation Trust, Physical Health Medical Lead for SLAM, where she led the development of a 5-year strategy, STP Clinical Lead for SLAM, as well as being the immediate past chair of the Rehab and Social Psychiatry faculty at our college. She has input to major policy and developed national standards and guidance in rehabilitation, including the AIMS rehab used by over 2/3 of the inpatient rehab units in England. Sri was a national advisor on the NHS-EI Commission Community Psychiatry Redesign Policy, which will form a core component of the NHS long-term plan, and was a member of the NICE Rehab Psychiatry Guidance Development Committee. She is currently the National Clinical Lead for Mental Health Rehabilitation at NHS-EI as part of the Getting It Right First Time programme. This involves working with clinicians and others to reduce unwarranted variation nationally in rehab services by benchmarking current performance and by leading from good practice. The aim being to improve service user experience, pathways and outcomes, whilst also ensuring more efficient use of funds. Providing rehab care locally is an essential outcome. She is also a leader in leadership and executive coaching and provides leadership development coaching program. Sri was awarded Psychiatrist of the Year 2017 by the Royal College of Psychiatrists and remains a spokesperson for the college, strongly advocating for good mental health services for the population. In 2019, Sri was awarded a CBE in the Queen's New Year's Honours for services to rehabilitation psychiatry. So over to you, Sri, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, Trudi, thank you so much. And thanks to the college for running this really important month and these events. I'm so sorry. I think that's my fault. I've said, oh, to Emma, just go ahead and send my old biography, thinking it's probably one that's been printed rather than meant to be read out. So I'm so sorry. You know, just very simply, Shri is enough, I think. Anyway, so my talk is going to be a little bit different because I knew, obviously, as Raj, in his roles, is going to give so much of the invaluable data and the current position, and also Cam coming after me in terms of the whole academic piece. So I wanted to speak a little bit more personally. And the title, Be the Change You Want to See in the World. And I guess it really just comes from life experience and the knowledge that change starts with ourselves. And we know that however much we can tell others to change, it's very easy to say, and to point to others and say you need to change, but actually how much of the time is it that we really, to be effective, we have to also do the work ourselves. And I guess just that whole idea of, you know, starting my own journey and thinking about some of my own biases and prejudice and how I, you know, overcame some of those. And I guess interestingly and shockingly, I suppose, I hadn't really understood the level of systemic racism, probably like many of us, I guess. And one of the first things that I really understood was when I heard Shashi Tharoor's very famous now Oxford Union speech, and just this whole idea of how, you know, during the colonial rule, the British reduced India's GDP from about 25% in the world to about 2% over the couple of hundred years or so. And infant mortality was through the roof, but, you know, literacy rates were scraping the bottom of the barrel for that country, for India. And I was really embarrassed that I hadn't known about this. And of course, I'd gone to school in England, I'd been taught a regular syllabus, and I hadn't come across it, okay? And so I think it's something for me, that lesson of, you know, how do we educate ourselves about some of the injustices, both for, you know, our own communities, but more broadly as well, you know, everybody who faces inequalities really, and racism in terms of the different populations that covers. And then, you know, understanding that, I guess, coming to our own sort of conclusions about how we might be able to support and help after having done the work ourselves. And I think one of the other really kind of things that flagged up for me on a personal level was I'm a trustee at the Poppy Factory, and so that's where they make a lot of the poppies that you all wear on, you know, November, the Remembrance Day and so on, and they make the wreaths, the royal wreaths and so on. And their other big project for over 10 years now has been getting wounded in service veterans back into paid work. Very good at it. We went over 1,000 a couple of years ago now. And they're very complex, you know, both physical and mental health issues that need supporting to get them back into work, and it can be really transformative for them. But at once, so one of the Remembrance Days, it was a centenary, and I started to see these pictures, all the Indian soldiers and the other Commonwealth soldiers that had fought in World War I, and the fact that we don't know anything about them really. They're hidden. But there are, both in France, but also, you know, in England, there are cemeteries for them. There's a Sikh cemetery, for example. But I just thought, isn't that really shocking that we just don't know? And I guess the reason that I'm making these points is because it's about the human stories. It's about your everyday people in Britain and other places in the world understanding, you know, that it was 1.5 million soldiers who fought and put their lives on the line to keep Britain free, and all the other Commonwealth soldiers as well, of colour. So, you know, even understanding, and we've had more data, you know, more data and some great film recently as well about, you know, the contribution of people from other countries and people of colour to the NHS and to all different aspects of British life. And I think by really airing that and people understanding and knowing, it does reduce racism, because it gives people that understanding of the fact that the country would not be as it was unless everybody had contributed, actually. So everybody now should be benefiting equally as well. So we must also, clearly, as well as doing that work ourselves, think about how we then move on to work with others to reduce systemic racism. So I think it really is about being partly that whole hearts and minds, changing hearts and minds and culture. And so the stories, the real narratives of what people have contributed and continue to contribute is really important. But also I think it is about supporting people who are in positions of power to understand their privilege, to really understand some of the, I guess, the lens that they see the world through, and be able to shift that. So then they can become allies and work alongside us. And something comes to mind that with the suffragettes, they talked about the fact at that point that when they were trying to win the vote, all the people who were making decisions were men. They didn't have a seat at the table. It's not quite like that now, but having said that, still the decisions are made by people who we need to bring on board as allies if we're really going to see change. And I think really, unless we get to that human level and that sort of knowledge that we're all interconnected, and unless we actually allow everybody to thrive, we're really not going to be seeing the full extent of what's possible in this country and in this world, quite frankly. So the other thing that I think is important is forming those alliances at all different levels, regional levels, national levels, and then, setting those key frameworks for how change is going to happen, and putting the data there as well, as Rajesh has said, to make sure that we can track what's going on and follow it through as well. But it does need to go as part of all these other elements: our own work, our support of our allies to do that work, and also then forming those strategic alliances, but also those very personal alliances in order to do the whole top down, bottom up, to make sure that we get rid of racism. There's no place for it. And the more each of us thrive, the more all of us will benefit. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sri. So beautifully eloquent as always. And forgive me for reading your CV blurb, but that's you and you deserve it. That's all you've achieved. So please don't ever apologise for your achievements or ever ask for it to be cut short, because that wouldn't be fair, would it? So thank you very much. That was an amazing talk.
Thanks, Trudi.
So please keep posting questions as we go along. I can see a couple appearing, so please do ask some more as we go along. So moving to our next speaker then, who is the incredible Dr. Shaheed Latif, whose title of his talk is Speaking Up, Acknowledgement and Change. So Dr. Latif is a consultant psychiatrist and a clinical director for adult and forensic services in Northamptonshire Healthcare NHS Foundation Trust. Over an extensive medical career, he has remained a versatile, accomplished and award-winning consultant with the experience to recognise and amalgamate the clinical needs of patients with strategic organisational direction. Over his career, he has been involved in establishing governance and managing change across a portfolio of roles in mental health care, leading multidisciplinary teams across multicultural environments, to champion clinical service transformation, resulting in substantial cost savings, whilst committed to the highest professional and ethical standards of practice. He has remained at the forefront and involved with recruitment, not only within his trust, but also into psychiatry for trainees. Dr. Latif is the current chair of the RC Psych Trent Division and British Pakistani Psychiatric Association, and is an active member of our college diaspora committee. He has done a lot of work on issues related to culture and mental health, especially during COVID-19. He led on a project producing videos on management of mental health during lockdown in 17 different languages, which are on the college website. Outside of work, he is on the BBC Asian Network panel of experts on mental health issues, and has also been involved with the Pakistan Cricket Board, guiding them on the utility of sports psychologists. Dr. Latif was appointed fellowship by the Royal College of Psychiatrists in October 2017. Shaheed, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Trudi. Thank you for that very generous introduction. Like Shri herself, obviously, it's quite humbling to hear that. It's not easy to hear your own bio being read out. But here we are. Anyway, another South Asian History Month. And as always, the college is always at the forefront. And it's always an honor to be here and represent the college on such an important platform. Racism, discrimination, prejudices, I mean, these are talks which we've been talking about. It's a college which they've led on. It's on the, on the media. We talk about these. Is it effective? Are we doing enough? What I can say is that a lot has been done. Things have changed to some extent, but have they changed enough? For me, the answer is no. There's still a lot of work to be done. I was born in London. I grew up in the late 70s, through the 80s, and then my family migrated back to Pakistan, where I graduated and subsequently came back to the UK. London, England was a very different place when I was growing up, and going to a simple football match was a complete no-no. I didn't want to get beaten up, didn't want to be called names. In fact, I didn't want to stand out like a sore thumb. It was a complete no-no. That's changed substantially, as you can see what's happened recently in the World Cup, in the European Cup, Euro 2020, and the amount of work that has gone through football and other sporting events, etc. One of the things that really sticks out for me is that when we're watching football matches, we see those things going across, kick racism out of football. And if nothing else, that's what we want to see on a day-to-day basis. One of the discussions that we're having today is in relation to systemic racism, is how can we tackle it? And that's what we need to do. We need to shout out again and again and again, and not lose hope. Growing up, I mean, what we've all experienced in our medical careers with healthcare professionals and in the general population, that racism can be from the covert and insidious to the overt and terrifying, having an impact on individuals' lives. The very issue of this institutional racism has had an impact. The res data, as Raj was alluding to earlier on, and is there for you to see. The fair to refer, a report commissioned by the GMC, is there for you to see. I would urge you to read these and understand these so that we get a good understanding of what we are dealing with. So what are the major impacts as healthcare professionals that racism may have, or in structural racism may have on our careers? Recruitment, promotions, representation at senior boards, executive levels, non-mandatory training. These are some of the very subtle things that we don't see, or that we see rather, and the impact that these have on individuals' careers. Racial assumptions, some people call them. Microaggressions is what they can lead to. Name calling, which can be seen as casual racism. Is there such a thing? But we need to call this out, and it's the responsibility of not just myself, people in responsibility, but everyone. It's everybody's duty, everybody's responsibility to be able to call this out. We see racism on a day-to-day basis because there's assumptions that we see, and we day-to-day in the media, some of the languages that we use, blackmail, black sheep of the family, I'm having a dark day, as opposed to, oh, it was just a white lie. These are some of the languages we need to really be conscious of. Is it unconscious bias? Is there such thing as unconscious bias? This is something, again, we need to look very carefully at. And when things come to the fore and to the conscious level, and if things like this still carry on, are there still unconscious bias or assumptions? So how do we tackle some of these issues? Looking around in various organizations, some of the work that the college does is something that we need to do on a day-to-day basis. And this is for all of us. Speak up is one of the first things. Do not be shy. Speak up for yourself and look out for others. That's really important. It's really important to assure that at senior board levels, at senior executive levels, there's appropriate representation. We've asked in our own trust, we've asked in the GMC to recruit experts who understand this much better. So there's equity, there's equality, there's diversity at the top level. When there is diversity at the top level, some of these things will look after themselves. We all understand the concept of cultural competence. For me, and this is what I see cultural competence as a tick box exercise. You sit for an afternoon or a couple of hours in front of your computer, you go through a little program, and then you tick it and you get a certificate that you are cultural competent. Is that what it's all about? I don't think so. It's a bit more than that. We need to replace the word cultural competence with cultural intelligence. Cultural intelligence is the lived experience where individuals understand and share and appreciate and celebrate all forms of cultures, diversity, etc. And until that isn't rife enough out there, we will still be struggling. Say no to racism completely, whether it's at your workplace, not only from your colleagues, but also from patients. We have to be very honest. I know for a fact in my own trust, we're doing a lot of work in this area where you will see even people from our service users spelling out racism or having some subtle racism. And I think a lot of support is required, and we need to support our staff in relation to that, give them a platform to be able to speak openly. Zero tolerance is what we need. Reverse mentoring is something which a word and something which has been used in various organizations, and it's extremely invaluable. Again, we've used it in our organization, and it's been priceless. I mean, individuals who have been in the process or gone through the process of reverse mentoring have actually seen how powerful it is. One of the examples, I suppose, for reverse mentoring is a film that I saw many years ago, an Ed Norton film called American History X. I would urge you to watch that film. It actually spells out the whole concept of an individual who belongs to a right-wing organization and how he ends up in prison with his cellmate being black, and the whole dynamics and how he changes. So do watch that film. It's actually really powerful, one of the best films I've seen. Don't be shy to have difficult conversations. This is something that we really need to encourage. If you're in a position, in a senior position of leadership, encourage that in your organization. If you're not in a position of leadership or just below that, encourage that anyway and make that initiating stance or being able to start having difficult conversations. I want to take the opportunity to really thank the college for setting up the South Asian History Month, because these are the kind of platforms that we need to utilize. And I know for a fact that other colleges, my other peers from other specialities really look towards our college and really appreciate the kind of work that's been done. It's not just the South Asian History Month, which is taking place now, took place last year, but even the Black History Month, which has been extremely, extremely helpful and powerful and given a platform for individuals like myself to be able to express and inform and educate and learn as well. And I just want to end by saying, when we talk about racism, there's only one race, and that's the human race. And that's, we are Homo sapiens, nothing else. Thank you very much.
Shaheed, thank you so much. Again, absolutely incredible to hear your talk. So thank you so much. I'm going to go straight on to our final speaker, who is none other than the amazing Professor Cam Bhui. It's an absolute privilege to have you here, Cam. And the title of your talk is South Asian History Month, Systemic Racism and How to Tackle It. So Professor Bhui is the editor of the British Journal of Psychiatry and the college editor chairing the Publications Management Board of the Royal College of Psychiatrists. He is Professor of Psychiatry and Honorary Consultant Psychiatrist at the University of Oxford. He is Director of the Synergy Collaborative Centre on Ethnic Inequalities, Severe Mental Illness and Multiple Disadvantage. He is a member of the Deanery of the School of Medicine and Dentistry, Deputy Lead of the Mental Health Theme of the North Thames Clerk and ARC. He is former Public Health Lead at the Royal College of Psychiatrists and now chairs PHE's Advisory Committee on Mental Health Campaigns. He's a member of the Advisory Group of Mental Health Policy Research Unit at UCL and KCL. He's also the co-founder of CAREF, an international mental health charity that promotes work for young people and their health through culture, sport, and arts. He was a founding member of the World Association of Cultural Psychiatry and president of WACP 2012 till 2015, when Queen Mary University hosted the World Congress of Cultural Psychiatry. He qualified in medicine at the United Medical Schools of Guy's and St Thomas's back in 1988 and subsequently worked at the Maudsley Institute of Psychiatry, Guy's, King, St Thomas's Hospitals and Medical Schools, being appointed to his first consultant clinical academic post as a senior lecturer in 2000. And he was appointed professor in 2003. Previously, he was a Wellcome Training Fellow in Health Services Research and Senior Medical Officer in Policy Research Programme at Department of Health. And I could go on, Cam, but I'm going to stop there because we want to hear you speak and also have a bit of time for questions. Cam,
well, thank you ever so much.
Grateful. Thank you to you. And you have a CBE as well, which isn't on there, of course.
Thank you ever so much, Trudi, for that rich and warm welcome and introduction. I wasn't really expecting all of that like the others, but there is something about us wanting to not be visible and claim our achievements sometimes because of the responses that has. So I'll say a little bit about that as we go along. I want to talk. I'm really impressed by the presentation so far, and I'm so pleased that some of the topics I was going to raise have already been raised, because I thought I might be a bit controversial, but it's terrific. So thank you for inviting me to speak today to celebrate South Asian History Month. Previous meetings have been powerful, humbling, revealing, moving, often intimate and emotional. The webinars are an important reminder of the contributions of South Asians to mental health care, the college and British society, not to mention global health systems, given how the diaspora are living and working in all parts of the world, contributing to local economies and health systems and societies. There are some tensions, though, by adopting South Asian as a terminology. I'm left a little bit uneasy in case we replicate the very structures and processes that have led in the past to oppression, including the colonial history and the need to categorize and count people who appear to be different to ourselves. The in-group, the dominant group, often use this activity. And this activity often serves the interests of the dominant group, more powerful ethno-racial groups within society. It's therefore incumbent upon us to critique and expose the limitations of such an approach whilst we tackle the structural drivers of inequalities. What might the terminology inflict upon ourselves and the practice of psychiatry if it derives from historical power structures that are still exercised? And they are very much alive today, as we know. Perhaps we're inured to them and they're invisible to us. So South Asian here represents the Indian, Pakistani and Bangladeshi and Sri Lankan peoples, reflecting the UK experience of migration from the subcontinent, making a distinction between the South and East Asian groups, as if those distinctions are valid. And of course, if you go to other countries, there are different distinctions. And as if the rich cultures and heritages of each group are uniform, but they're not, as we know. So there are three areas of action that I think are important. The first is around history and identity. Firstly, proudly share and reveal diasporal identities, including your unique perspectives, characters, literature, arts, and cultures within all the splendid disruptive idiosyncrasies that and oppressive practice. This includes all formulations of science, the self, reasoning, rationality, arts, laws, and the gods. Thus, we need to keep in mind our diasporal histories, both those well narrated, perhaps imperfectly, as well as those silenced, including atrocious acts in the past and present, which appear to be driven by historical notions of race, ethnicity, nationality, and culture. These lie dormant for much of the time and appear in particular political climates and contexts, and at particular times of crisis, when impositions or renegotiations of identity abound, and we've seen some of that recently. There is no contradiction between British identity and the identity each of us might hold, inherited from our different philosophical and cultural positions, inherited from our ancestors and traditions. I say this as the dominant political narrative and systems and institutions attack these various identities and philosophies on a regular basis, and we've seen some of that recently. And they can be easily reactivated, and prejudices from the past can reasonably easily be reactivated in the present. We must be very self-aware. This is my second key point. Pay attention to the ordinary and the mundane. The racism doesn't signal its presence. We must actually be self-aware and sense those ordinary moments in which structurally driven interactions, possibly unconscious, but I don't buy that so much, arise in those everyday conversations, discussions, negotiations, and decisions that are the substance of our professional lives and our personal lives. These processes are not immune from those structural forces, but these moments are lost in the business of our routines and our time-pressured schedules. We do need to slow down, do some slow thinking and pause and watch these moments. This means catching moments in which one person is being diminished by another, or a negative attitude forms of one person of another, or someone is able to hear the views of a darker, perceived lesser person than they can hear of an identical view expressed by someone of a different race and heritage. Or if someone in a position of authority and power feels challenged because someone in a perceived lesser position, race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, other identity markers, expresses a contrary view, refuses to capitulate, or offends by their very existence and success, as if that challenges the deeply held schema that the racist system purports and promotes. So I'm sure some of you extremely successful people in the audience and speakers will have experienced this. Your very success is questioned, and so it does push us into spaces of invisibility, self-protection, silence. And I would argue we need to challenge that. But I think psychiatry has some special problems. I would argue that the response to social adversity and distress being formulated as a pathology of the individual, the embodied self, of the irrational or insightless self, absolves us of recognizing the structural problems and tackling the structural drivers of racism. I have much sympathy here with arguments of Suma and Fernando and Trishik Jadhav and Pat Bracken and others about psychiatry being embedded and deeply influenced by the Enlightenment notions of rationality and exotic peoples and their cultures being lesser. These are things that unfortunately colonize our brains as well. And we need to challenge them. We need to throw out these thoughts. But it's to do so requires what Paul Hoggett calls intellectual aggression. But in confronting these moments, we also are troubled because the psychodynamics is that our very thinking and our reason and rationality is attacked. There are bionic breaks in thinking, for example, and or what Helen Morgan has called the silence of racism. No one can talk or respond because they're so stunned by it. Or you say something and people respond as if you've said nothing. All of this is alive and well today. We like to think we've escaped such historical notions, but their existence is seen on a daily basis if you look. I promise you, if you look at your daily conversations tomorrow, they will be there. And of course, politicians, practitioners, etc., we all have a responsibility, but it is wary. I have specific historical examples. I won't go into those now. I'm so pleased Shuri mentioned the army. I'm writing some historical fiction at the moment, and I'm looking for an agent, so if you have a tip, send it my way. But I have a whole plethora of examples of South Asians contributing to the First and Second World Wars, to science, to healthcare, to industry, being silenced. Sometimes the cheaper soldiers from the Gurkhas, for example, or particular groups of them, were considered more expendable than others and sent into higher risk situations. I could say more on the last Maharaja Dalip Singh from my own ancestry, who was coerced to live in the UK, separated from his mother, and was Queen Victoria's friend and almost adopted son, but lost all power and wealth and identity and died miserably. And there's a whole story behind that. But when you read history, it exposes all the power structures that we think are dismantled and don't exist anymore. The East India Company and the way the colonies established administrative systems around the world with a few thousand people running millions, all of that knowledge is present today in our everyday lives. So we need to be aware of that and mindful of it. I'm not saying we're going to be able to dismantle all of it, but here's the challenge. We have to then use those systems, those very power structures that are contaminating and potentially harmful to ourselves and others, and make use of them to drive reform, new systems of governance and government, reverse commissioning, participatory approaches, empowering the public, listening to experience, challenging the way spend is happening. There are a couple of links that I hope are in the chat or will be available on the website, which allude in more detail to papers that I've written on looking at structural factors and how you dismantle them. But I think this includes thinking about race equality as a public health problem and having an Office of Race Equality and Public Health in government, cross-government, that responds to the disparities in all forms of institutions. We need radical reforms of schools and higher education institutions to be much more ethical and eco-social, not just biopsychosocial. Remember the history and the ecology and the environment. Establish a national ombudsman for race equality to hear complaints and review actions. Get rid of NDAs. I think it's a disgrace that racist allegations can be buried under NDAs and that institutions absolve themselves of responsibility. So business efficiency and profit can sometimes oppress race equality. Map local government and cross-sectoral systems by inequalities with better metrics. Invest, of course, in all the stuff that the colleges campaign for, better quality data sets, including race, ethnicity, health and crime, and cross-government actions. Use existing mechanisms of data collection and repurpose them. But we have to act decisively. We have to be careful of the systems that we're trying to dismantle, contaminating our own thinking and us actually becoming part of the problem. We have to, I would argue, think about kindness, truth and reconciliation as an approach, not adversarial combat, not the way things are done in Parliament. That doesn't help at all. We need a different way of resolving these problems with honesty and enactment and intentionality and purpose, feeling well supported and not lonely in doing so. The current forms of media and messaging and public broadcasting and all of the things that reflect our cultural and historical racial identities need to be rethought and reformulated to produce a better society for all of us in which we can all flourish. That's quite a canter through a whole range of complex issues in which there are many, many authors who have written extensively, and I'm benefited from their thinking, but I hope that's also given us a bit more of a structure of the sorts of things we can do practically. And I'm so pleased they elaborate so nicely what other speakers have presented. So thank you so much for that opportunity.
Absolutely fantastic talk. Thank you so much for that. Absolutely brilliant. So many I guess things to think about. And just moving on then, we have only got 4 minutes left for Q&A, and there are a fair few questions posted. So Emma has kindly agreed, if the panelists agree and if the audience agrees, to extend for 5 minutes till 4:05, if that's okay, please. I'm assuming that's okay with everybody. So I'm going to start some questions. And so we've got 9 minutes for some questioning. So the first one, perhaps if I can direct this to Raj to start with. So there's just a clarification, which I'll ask you. Is the GMC investigating more complaints against BAME doctors, or are there more complaints against BAME doctors to GMC in general? There's another question about that. You're on mute, Raj.
Thank you, Trudi, and thank you to the person who asked this question. There are more complaints about BAME doctors, or ethnic minority doctors, to the GMC. And of these complaints, GMC investigates disproportionately higher number of complaints pertaining to BAME staff. I'm actually going to draw your attention to a link that is posted in the chat. I'll post it again. This is the latest data from the Medical Workforce Race Equality Standard. It's useful to have this.
That's lovely. Raj, another quickie for you, and I think you might have answered, but Dr. Raj, would you support a study exploring good practice in trusts that support mental health clinicians from ethnic minority backgrounds, especially to deepen our understanding of what work is being done about the nature of reasons of complaints in a society where mental health is on the increase?
Yes, I've answered it online, and I definitely would support.
Yeah.
This type of good practice studies need to happen, and we actually need to have ways of implementing good practice. We also need to have good oversight and governance systems too, which are not prejudiced.
That's wonderful, thank you. Shaheed, people are asking what the name of your film is. Have you replied to that?
Yes, I put it on. It says American History X. I've put it on there.
That's wonderful. So I'm just trying to capture all the questions because they've been posted in different places. Perhaps if I move to one, where's it gone? Where's it gone? Where's it gone? This is from Dolly Sud. Cam, perhaps to you this one, a significant proportion of the treatments we use are based on studies in which populations are not representative of those we treat. Further, certain ethnic groups are overrepresented in particular parts of the mental health system. Do you suggest we address these issues? Also, do you agree with the suggestion that all research should include a race equality impact assessment before being approved?
Yes, yes, and yes. I think it's really important, and it's only just being recognised. Although we've always been banging on about this for 2, 3, 4, 5 decades, it's been recognised more widely now by commissioners. And across government, I think race equality assessment, not only for research, but for all policy is needed, I think. I think is a failure systemically we need to tackle. It's always easier to push it back on individual behaviours, the embodied self. And I think the problem is we need to recognise societal structures and have a long-standing existence.
Thank you. Moving on to another question / statement, perhaps one for Sri. Is it possible to review the processes around the amount of unrestricted taxpayers' money spent by NHS trusts in hiring high-paid solicitors to demonise doctors, health professionals, so as to defend race discrimination claims? What do you think, Sri, to that one?
I think that's such an important question because none of us want to have our money spent on this. And indeed, it's the GMC, it happens with the GMC, it happens with trusts as well, doesn't it? We're seeing that. And I think essentially, there are different ways to do this. You know, people can get involved much earlier in terms of mediation. You know, really good organisations and individuals actually, and some good people who are from ethnic minority backgrounds who do this kind of work. And I think maybe we need to move to process. Cam talked about use process and use the systems, and that's so important. It's about understanding current structures and then changing those processes in order that they can be fairer. So I'd absolutely agree. I mean, just thinking about our own trust, some of the issues that came up a number of years ago now, but you know, then we've been working on them since that, was the whole thing of people, you know, nurses of colour, particularly nurses, but all professions actually, being discriminated against to the point where they were had many more complaints and were going through disciplinaries, you know, through the trust. And as a result of that, the process changed. And what happened was that anybody who was about to be taken through a disciplinary, and if you know anybody, particularly people of colour, the case had to be discussed with one of the exec. There was a specific person who it was discussed with. They really got more support to understand some of the issues. And actually that has changed practice as a result and the outcomes. So absolutely, I think there are better ways to do this. And the idea of moving quickly to this kind of very, you know, conflictual way of behaving is not good for anyone. And it's not a good way to spend our money at all. And not just the money, you know, it's about what is the message that sends out to people. It's not acceptable, it needs to change, and we need to find the routes to do that well.
Thank you, Sri. One for Shaheed, please. I've come across many patients and other South Asian clinicians who feel we have internal perceptions and prevent supporting each other. What can we do about it? Shaheed?
Very interesting question. Like any other scenario, there will also always be, you know, dynamics going on. But that doesn't take away the fact, with all the data that we have, that there is, you know, the racism, it does exist. Of course, we need to support one another, and that's what we're doing at the moment. Of course, there will be certain perception from different individuals. We have to acknowledge that, and we have to take those on board. What I always do say when I am talking to peers and colleagues and medical students, etc., is that, you know, we have to be very careful and conscious of the fact that we do not call everything racism just because we don't get it. We have to be very conscious. It has to be very balanced. That doesn't take away the fact that that does not happen. And we'll also have to balance that against making sure that we support our colleagues and peers and individuals who do experience it. So it's a very fine balance.
Lovely. Thank you. So to all of you, maybe like because we're running out of time, perhaps like a 10-second response to this. Is the term BAME itself a bit biased? Why can't it just be ME for all or me for all?
It's not a 10-second answer, but a very good question. I don't think many people agree with the term BAME, which also tends to get used as a word BAME, which I think it should never be accepted. So the point is that we should not cluster people from all different South Asian countries together. We should not marry the data together. For example, if you look at medical school entries, there will be a surplus of Indian children entering medical schools, but there will not be the same thing from Bangladeshi families, for example. If you collate information about average household income, it actually messes up things because there are differential experiences between people from different backgrounds. But it helps in some ways in order to make the case about racism.
Brilliant. Right, I'm going to stop there and not go to everybody. Shaheed, the huge representation of BAME people in medicine, nursing, politics, sports and modern life in general, what else will it take to gain true equality and recognition in the eyes of Great Britain? Again, as short as you can, please.
I think just keep doing what we are doing, like we are doing today. I think we need to keep spelling it out. And that's the only way to do it. We must not stop. I mean, Raj and Ladi are doing a fantastic job at the college. The college itself is doing a fantastic job. And we need to make sure at a trust level that we as leaders in our position that we continue to spell this out.
Wonderful. Cam, is it possible to speak of positive aspects of colonial rule?
That's a really interesting question, isn't it? I was talking to a relative, an older gentleman of 70 odd, who actually expressed that view. He said all the older folk thought that at least they were conflict free at the time of the colonial possession of the Indian subcontinent. But of course, they were getting poorer and poorer over time. And I think people want to have empowerment and to be free of somebody else ruling their lands and determining their political structures, even if it meant poverty or conflict. I don't think colonialism is good for anybody. I think the power structures and the exploitation and the atrocities and the lies and the silence are just unacceptable. And I wonder what it is we do today that we can't see, which in 10, 20, 50 years' time, we'll have a similar view about.
Cam, thank you so much for that final answer. And we have gone beyond our 5 minutes. We've noted the comment about a more diverse group of speakers. We are spread across England today, but you know, point taken. And perhaps if there was one thing more each of you would like the college to do, what would it be? Cam first, and I'm going to do, this is like 5 seconds to finish off with. Cam, what more does the college need to do about this?
I'm going to be very brief. I think more of the same, but I think we just need to have more of a structural lens as well as to what's going on, and this delicate tension between a system that oppresses and needing to be within that system and dismantle it. That's a very difficult balance, and the more awareness of that. But the college is doing fantastic work.
Excellent. Raj, what do we need to do more of? Or what's your 10 minutes wish?
I think we need to have a very transparent and accountable complaints process. That's what I would like to see, and that will set examples and precedents, and there should be good legal backing.
Thank you. Shaheed?
Yeah, thank you. Fantastic job. College doing an excellent job. I just think we need to outreach more of the college, the work they're doing. We are RC Psych, psychiatry, mental health, and the impact that it has. I think we need to spell that out more, the impact that racism, discrimination has on mental health. We need to take the lead on that. We are, but we need to connect more with outside external organizations and spread it out to them.
Brilliant. Thank you, Shaheed. And finally, but not least, Sri, what's your ask of the college? Sri?
Frozen.
I think are you
Trudi.
there, Sri?
Were you just saying my name?
I did. You
sorry.
froze. What's your
My-
10-second ask of the college?
Okay, my phone's overheated, so you just have to have me without the camera. So I think it's probably, let's hold people to account more. Anywhere that we have psychiatrists in post, let's hold them all to account for the things that we know work and the things that we know need to be done to dismantle systemic racism. Nothing less than that.
That's absolutely fantastic. So on that note, I'm going to thank our amazing college staff who've helped us orchestrate the webinar. Thank you, the guests who have taken time to listen today, but most importantly, these amazing speakers. So Dr. Raj Mohan, Dr. Shaheed Latif, Dr. Sri Kalidindi and Professor Bhui for being our speakers today. Thank you very much, and I very much hope that you've enjoyed our South Asian History Month webinar. So see you next year for our next webinars. Have a lovely evening. Bye, everybody.
Everyone.
Thank you all. Bye.